The fluorescent lights hum their electric song, that particular frequency that makes the back of your teeth ache after midnight. Sacred Heart's pediatric ICU in Raleigh runs on a rhythm most people never hear, the soft percussion of monitors, the whisper of ventilators pushing air into small lungs, the occasional page crackling through overhead speakers like distant thunder. Rachel Torres moves through this world with the kind of invisibility that comes from being forgettable. A temp nurse on night shift. No permanent badge. No history. No weight. She pushes a medication cart that squeaks slightly on the left wheel, the sound barely noticeable beneath the ambient hum of machines. The cart moves like an extension of her body, guided by muscle memory that doesn't match her current job. Her scrubs are standard hospital blue, loose enough to hide the definition underneath, and she keeps her eyes down as she passes the nursing station. 3 other permanent staff members sit charting. None of them look up. Good. Bed 7 is where she lingers longest. Captain Michael Chen's 8-year-old son has been comatose for 22 days. The car accident happened on Route 40, a drunk driver in a red pickup hitting the family sedan at 47 miles per hour. The boy's name is David. He's deaf, born that way, and the hospital's 10 rotating doctors have spent nearly 3 weeks disagreeing on everything except that the prognosis is poor. Blunt force trauma to the frontal lobe. Intracranial pressure fluctuating. Cerebral edema that responds to medication, then swells again. The doctors call it a waiting game. Rachel calls it something else entirely as she reads the medication orders charted by Dr. Sterling, the unit director. The chart feels wrong the moment she touches it. Her fingers trace the medication timeline. Propofol at 0.1 mg per kilogram, appropriate for sedation, standard dosing. But the refill requests come every 16 hours instead of the usual 24-hour cycle. That's 15% higher than necessary. She doesn't need to calculate it out loud. Her eyes catalog the numbers the way a musician reads sheet music. There. And there. A sedative ordered 3 times in 48 hours when twice would have been sufficient. Then the equipment requisitions. A bear hugger warming blanket, requested despite the boy's normal core temperature. A level 1 rapid infuser, the hospital's newest, most expensive piece of equipment, sitting in Bay 7 when David's for access hasn't required rapid transfusion since his fluid stabilized at day 14. Both items are clinically unnecessary. Both items are billed directly to Captain Chen's insurance. Both items generate revenue streams that Rachel can see if she knows where to look. She doesn't know that she's looking yet. Not consciously. But her hands know. Her left hand trembles slightly as she writes the patient's vitals into the electronic chart. It's a tremor that comes and goes, usually when she's processing data too fast. She corrects by gripping her pen harder, pressing the barrel between her fingers with enough pressure that the ink doesn't shake across the screen. One of her tells. She's working on it. Reviewing orders, Ms. Torres. She doesn't flinch. That's the trick, never let the startle show on your face. Never let the adrenaline spike reach your eyes. She clicks the chart closed and turns toward the nursing station with a neutral expression, the kind of face you'd forget 30 seconds after seeing it. Dr. Sterling stands 6 feet 2 inches tall, and he carries his height the way men with money carry themselves, like it was chosen, not inherited. His white coat is pressed with a crease that looks like it could cut glass. The Rolex on his wrist catches the fluorescent light and throws it back in Rachel's direction like a warning. His hair has that particular shade of distinguished gray that comes from a colorist, not from time. Checking the medication sequence, Rachel says quietly. Her voice is carefully calibrated, deferential without being obsequious, the voice of someone apologizing for existing. Want to make sure I understand the protocol. Sterling's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. That's not your responsibility on night shift. You administer what's ordered. Yes, doctor. Questions about dosing go to the attending. Not to you. Of course, doctor. Rachel holds his gaze for exactly 1 second, then looks down at the chart in her hands. The subordinate body language comes naturally now. Practice. My apologies. He doesn't move. She can feel him evaluating her the way a predator evaluates prey, assessing threat level, looking for weakness. The silence stretches for 3 seconds. 4. The ventilator in Bay 7 hisses its mechanical breath. "How long have you been with our agency?" Sterling finally asks, but it's not really a question. It's a threat wearing a question's clothing. 2 weeks tomorrow, Doctor. And you plan to stay? Rachel is quiet for a moment. She's choosing her words the way a sniper chooses a vantage point. "I work where I'm assigned." Sterling smiles then, a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, a smile like a wolf showing its teeth before it decides whether to bite or simply establish dominance. "Good. Because I run a tight unit. People who ask questions tend to create problems. And problems tend to have consequences." He turns and walks away before she can respond, his footsteps echoing down the corridor with the confidence of a man who's never been told no. Rachel watches him disappear around the corner toward his office, and only then does she allow her shoulders to drop by half an inch. She looks back at Bay 7. Captain Chen is asleep in the chair beside his son's bed, his head tilted at an angle that will make his neck hurt when he wakes. He's been sleeping in that chair for most of 3 weeks, wearing the same khaki uniform he had on when David was admitted. The Navy doesn't make you go home. They just stop calling after a while. Rachel approaches the bed quietly. David's respirator hisses and clicks with mechanical precision. The fur line in his left arm is taped down with the kind of care that suggests someone gentle placed it. His small hand lies on top of the blanket, still and pale. She checks his pupils with the pen-like clip to her pocket, reactive, though sluggish. She records the findings. She checks the foresight for signs of infection. Nothing. Clean. What she sees in David's chart is negligence disguised as care. Unnecessary medications keeping a child sedated when he might be healing without them. Equipment that generates revenue but not recovery. A doctor who's chosen profit over protocol, and a child who's paying the price in days spent unconscious. She's about to leave when Captain Chen stirs. His eyes open, the eyes of a man who hasn't slept properly in weeks, who's learned to wake at any sound that might mean his son is crashing. He looks at Rachel with the careful hope of someone afraid to hope. "Any change?" His voice is gravel and exhaustion. "Vitals are stable," Rachel says. She keeps her voice level, informative. He's holding steady. Chen nods slowly, looking back at his son. He doesn't see Rachel in her baggy scrubs and forgettable face. He doesn't see the woman who climbed into a burning vehicle in Kandahar and dragged a man back from the edge of fire and death. He sees a temp nurse, someone temporary, someone passing through. Most people do. Rachel returns the chart to the station, moving through the rest of her rounds with the kind of efficiency that leaves no trace. She checks for other patients. She administers medications ordered by doctors whose names she's beginning to recognize. She documents everything. She asks no more questions. But her left hand is still trembling. It's nearly 2 a.m. when she takes her break, walking down to the staff locker room in the basement where the air is cooler and the light is dimmer and nobody asks questions about why the temp nurse keeps looking at things she shouldn't be looking at. She opens her locker, number 247, temporary assignment, no nameplate, and stares at the pair of worn combat boots sitting on the bottom shelf. The leather is cracked from the desert heat. Kandahar sun turns quality leather into something that looks like dried blood if you don't condition it properly. She hasn't conditioned them in 11 years. That was the point. The boots are supposed to be anonymous. They're supposed to be dead, along with the person who wore them into fire. She closes the locker without touching them. When she returns to the ICU, the monitors in Bay 7 are alarming. Not critical. Not yet. But the alarm tone is different. She can hear the change in David's blood oxygen saturation without looking at the screen. 78% and dropping. The child's lungs are struggling against the sedation cocktail Sterling prescribed, fighting a chemical weight that's too heavy for a small body bearing fresh trauma. She moves toward the bed. The attending on call is Dr. Reeves, a younger physician with decent clinical instincts but not enough spine to challenge Sterling's orders. He's reading something on his tablet when Rachel reaches him, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of someone who knows exactly what she's talking about. David Chen's SATs are declining. 78 and trending down. Reeves glances up from his tablet, frowning. He was fine 20 minutes ago. The sedation load is too heavy for his current respiratory status, Rachel says. It's not really phrased as a suggestion. We need to reduce the propofol by at least 15% and increase the PEEP on the ventilator. Reeves hesitates. And in that hesitation, Rachel sees the exact moment he's considering whether to override Sterling's orders, whether the legal liability of changing another doctor's medication protocol is worth the risk to a patient he's never going to see after his rotation ends in 3 days. He chooses safety. Not for David. For himself. Sterling wrote those orders. I'm not going to change them. Rachel nods once. She doesn't argue. That's not how you change things. That's how you confirm what you already know, that the system protects doctors more effectively than it protects children. She returns to the monitors and pulls a chair beside David's bed. She'll sit there until his oxygen levels recover naturally, or until something worse happens, or until Sterling arrives for morning rounds and wonders why his carefully calibrated medication schedule failed to keep the captain's son sleeping through the night. The ventilator hisses. The monitors beep. The fluorescent lights hum their electric song. And in locker 247 downstairs, a pair of worn combat boots sits in the dark, waiting for the person who used to wear them to remember who she is. The morning huddle at Sacred Heart's pediatric ICU begins like every other Tuesday, 10 doctors rotating through, coffee cooling in styrofoam cups, the fluorescent lights casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white that makes skin look like it's been drained of blood. Dr. Sterling stands at the head of the conference table, his tailored suit pressed to a knife edge, and taps his pen against the patient assignments. Rachel stands at the back wall near the supply cart, her scrubs wrinkled from the night shift, hands folded in front of her, saying nothing. Sterling glances her way with the expression of someone who's just noticed an insect under glass. Our temporary nursing consultant, he announces, loud enough for the entire unit to hear, is probably not going to make it past the week. He smiles, a smile like a shark showing its teeth, and leans back in his chair. Let's be honest. She's overqualified for the basics and underqualified for critical care. I'm taking bets. $20 says she cries by Wednesday. Anyone? 2 residents laugh nervously. One actually pulls out a wallet. Sterling watches Rachel's face, hunting for a crack, some visible sign of the doubt he's trying to plant. She takes one measured breath. Doesn't look away. Doesn't speak. The silence stretches for 3 seconds, then Dr. Patel shifts his weight and someone coughs and the moment dissolves, but Sterling's jaw tightens because that stillness in her, that absolute absence of the wounded reaction he was manufacturing, bothers him in ways he can't quite articulate. By afternoon, the cafeteria at Sacred Heart smells like institutional food reheated under heat lamps, a particular blend of overcooked chicken and something vaguely medicinal that lives in the walls. Rachel sits alone at a corner table, the Chen boys chart open in front of her, her lunch tray holding a turkey sandwich and a plastic cup of orange jello that trembles slightly when the overhead vents kick into their rattling cycle. She's reviewing the medication orders again, the ones that don't align with the child's actual clinical status. There are inconsistencies, too many consultations, too many interventions for a stable patient, but Sterling is careful. Careful enough that the pattern only emerges if you're looking for it. And Sterling absolutely knows she's looking. He approaches with his entourage, 3 residents trailing behind him like pilot fish, all of them laughing at something Sterling just said, all of them performing the confidence that comes from never having had it seriously questioned. Sterling stops directly at her table. The air pressure changes. Still playing detective, sweetheart. His voice carries across the cafeteria in a way that makes 6 nearby tables suddenly very interested in their food. You know what they say about temps who can't hack real nursing. They go back to community college clinics and pretend they had real experience here. He leans against the edge of her table, his jacket falling open to reveal the $4,000 watch that costs more than Rachel's monthly rent. These kids need doctors. Real physicians. Not some. His hand reaches out and flicks her notebook closed with a gesture designed to be casual, designed to look like an accident. His other hand catches the edge of her lunch tray. For a moment, just half a second, his fingers are under the tray's edge. Then he pushes. The tray lifts and tilts and crashes to the tile floor with the particular sound of ceramics striking hard surface, orange jello splattering across the tile like a crime scene, turkey sandwich skidding across the floor, water from the plastic cup spreading in a slow-motion wave across the floor. Sterling drops the Chen boys chart on top of the mess, papers fluttering down to land in a spill, hospital records scattered like wounded birds. The cafeteria goes dead silent. 50 people stop chewing. Forks lower to plates. Sterling's smile widens as he watches Rachel. This is the moment. This is where the cracks show. Pick that up, sweetheart. Make yourself useful. His voice is a command wrapped in contempt, delivered the way you'd speak to someone who exists primarily to serve your purposes. Rachel kneels slowly. The movements are deliberate, measured, controlled, the kind of control that comes from knowing exactly how much anger lives in your hands and choosing not to use it. She gathers the scattered papers first, blotting them against her scrub top, then stacks them on the dry portion of the table. She's gathering the pieces of the sandwich, the plastic cup, working methodically while the entire cafeteria watches. And then, just once, just for a single moment, her composure fractures. A single tear escapes down her cheek, clear and perfect, catching the fluorescent light. It's the only visible crack in her facade, the only acknowledgement that something in that moment landed hard. She doesn't wipe it away immediately. She lets it track down to her jawline while she continues gathering soggy papers. Then she rises to her full height. Her shoulders square. Her eyes meet Sterling's with a flatness that is somehow more terrifying than any anger could be. When she speaks, her voice has dropped an octave, not raised in pitch but lowered in register, like a guitar string tuned down a half step. I've cleaned up bigger messes than this, Doctor. The words carry weight. They carry something else, too, something that echoes with authority in a way that doesn't match the scrub she's wearing or the temp badge on her collar. For just a moment, Sterling's smile falters. Something in her bearing shifts his perception, and for half a second, he sees something that terrifies him without understanding why. Then his face hardens and he laughs, a sharp, dismissive sound, and walks away, his residents trailing behind him like confused children. Rachel stands motionless for 3 seconds. Then she walks toward the bathroom, the wet papers still clutched in her hands. She doesn't look at anyone. Nobody tries to stop her. The women's bathroom on the 3rd floor is empty at 1:56 p.m., which is the only reason Rachel allows her hands to move the way they want to move. She stands at the sink scrubbing orange jello from her shoes with paper towels, the water running warm over her knuckles, and her hands are shaking. Actually shaking. Muscle memory is an extraordinary thing. Her body remembers how to perform under fire, how to move under pressure, how to survive the unsurvivable. But it doesn't remember how to swallow public humiliation designed specifically to break you. A young nurse enters, one of the day shift residents, maybe 24 years old, eyes concerned, and asks if Rachel is okay. Rachel nods without looking up. I'm fine. Always am. The young nurse leaves because there's nothing to argue with in that tone, that absolute absence of emotional availability. By 6 p.m., when Rachel's shift ends and she punches out at the time clock, Sterling is already on his phone in his office on the 5th floor. He's got his contact list open, 3 board members who owe him from the medical equipment contract where he splits kickbacks with the supplier, each of them understanding that Sterling's recommendation means a particular manufacturer gets awarded the $140 million contract for the hospital's cardiac infrastructure upgrade. I need to lodge a formal complaint about the temporary nursing contractor, he says into the phone, his voice smooth as expensive scotch. Rachel Torres, employed through Superior Staffing Solutions. Insubordination. Questioning physician orders in front of staff. Unprofessional conduct. He pauses, listening. No, I don't think she's a liability. I think she's a liability. She needs to be gone before she becomes a legal problem. By the time he hangs up, the mechanism is already in motion, 3 board members making 1 call each to the temp agency, 3 separate complaints about drug diversion procedures and patient safety concerns and general unsuitability for critical care environments. But that's not the worst part. That's not what's really driving Sterling to burn his phone lines at 6:38 p.m. on a Tuesday. What's driving him is the absolute certainty that Rachel Torres saw something in his patient files that shouldn't be visible, that she noticed the pattern of unnecessary consultations and billable procedures, and that she won't stop digging until she finds the specific traces of the fraud. And he's right. He's absolutely right. Because at 2:33 a.m. on the morning of day 6, when Captain Chen's 8-year-old son's monitor screams with an alarm that tears through the quiet PQ like a war siren, Rachel Torres will be the one standing closest to the bed, and her hands will move with the precision of someone who's held lives together in the dark before. The code alarm cuts through the pediatric ICU like a scream. Heart rate climbing, 168, 174, 182. Blood pressure dropping, 92/55, 87/48. The Chen boy's chest rises and falls with the ventilator's mechanical rhythm, but his oxygen saturation is plummeting, 78, 72, 68, because something is preventing his heart from filling properly. Rachel hits the emergency button and starts assessment while Dr. Patel, the first-year resident on call, stumbles through the double doors still rubbing sleep from his eyes, and what Rachel sees in those first 5 seconds is a child in cardiac tamponade, fluid crushing the heart in its own pericardial sac, minutes from complete cardiovascular collapse. She moves with the speed of someone who's done this in combat zones. Pericardiocentesis, she says to Patel, already pulling the crash cart, already prepping the equipment. We need a 14-gauge angiocath needle and a 30 cubic centimeter syringe. Right now. Patel stares at the monitors, the numbers, the desperate mathematics of a child slipping toward death. His hands shake. I can't. Rachel doesn't waste time. She doesn't wait for permission or hierarchy or the chain of command. She preps the boy's chest with betadine in swift, precise strokes, palpates the intercostal space between ribs 4 and 5, and finds her landmark with the certainty of someone who's performed this procedure under far worse conditions. The needle slides in at exactly 45 degrees. Dark fluid, almost brown, thick with old blood, fills the syringe. 20 cc, 40 cc, 60 cc. The boy's monitor begins its descent from the stratosphere. The heart rate drops from 182 to 156 to 138. The oxygen saturation begins to climb, 71, 76, 82, 88. The muffled heart sounds clear. The crisis fractures. Rachel withdraws the needle with the kind of controlled movement that comes from having done this before, and then Captain Chen bursts through the double doors in wrinkled civilian clothes and sees his son breathing easier, the crisis resolved, and finds Rachel disposing of the needle with the efficiency of someone for whom this is routine. What happened? Chen gasps, his voice rough with the kind of fear that only a parent watching their child die can produce. Your son is stable, Rachel says quietly. Cardiac tamponade. We decompressed the pericardium. He's going to be okay. She doesn't elaborate. She doesn't explain the miracle of that moment or the half-second decisions that saved his life. She just states facts like a person reporting weather, like a person for whom extraordinary things are simply part of the job. Patel stammers something about textbook procedure, but Chen is staring at Rachel with an intensity that goes beyond gratitude. He's seeing something in her bearing, something military in the way she moved, something that doesn't match the temp badge on her collar or the scrubs she's wearing. Across the unit, Sterling emerges from his office where the code alarm woke him, and his face goes completely white as he processes what just happened. This temp nurse didn't just save a patient. She just eliminated the careful structure of billable consultations and extended critical care that was generating an additional $18,000 per week in fraudulent charges. The cardiac monitor's shriek cuts through the ICU silence like an air raid siren. 2:47 a.m. Rachel's eyes snap to the monitor bank above Captain Chen's son's bed before her body even registers movement. Heart rate 178. Blood pressure 89/54 and dropping. The numbers don't lie. Neither does the boy's skin, ashen, lips taking on that bluish tint that means his heart is working against itself. She moves. No moment of hesitation. No checking the charge nurse first. Her hands are already in motion toward the bedside monitor when she reads the rhythm. The QRS complex is compressed, the waveform squeezed flat like something is pressing down on the boy's heart from the outside. Pulsus paradoxus on the monitor. Muffled heart sounds from the documentation in his chart. She's already running the diagnosis backward from the vital signs. Cardiac tamponade. The fluid that should have drained from his pericardium, the sac around his heart, hasn't. It's accumulated. It's choking him. And it's killing him right now. Get Dr. Chen from the waiting room, Rachel says to the charge nurse. No inflection. Not a request. A command. Now. The resident on call, Morrison, stumbles from the physician's station, still half asleep. His eyes land on the plummeting blood pressure and he freezes. Literally freezes. Hands hanging at his sides. Mouth half open. The kind of freeze that happens when the theoretical becomes real and every protocol you memorized in medical school suddenly feels 10,000 miles away. Rachel doesn't wait for him to thaw. She moves to the supply cart with the precision of someone who has done this before, because she has. Not in a pediatric ICU. In a forward surgical team tent in Helmand province with nothing but field supplies and a Navy corpsman's hands shaking worse than hers are steady. The 14-gauge needle is in her hand, the ultrasound probe prepped in 40 seconds flat. She's already reading the fluid collection above the ventricle. Thick. Dark. Pericardial effusion the size of a grapefruit wrapped around the boy's struggling heart. Call Dr. Sterling, the resident finally manages, the words coming out like a person waking from a nightmare. We need this needle in the pericardium in 90 seconds or this child codes, Rachel says. Still calm. Still lethal. Which do you want me to do, doctor? The resident has no answer. Nobody else in the ICU does either. The night shift crew, for nurses, one tech, one attending covering 2 units, they all know Rachel's right. They all know what cardiac tamponade looks like when it's winning. And they all know the only thing between this child's heartbeat and flat line is the woman with the needle in her hand. Rachel localizes. The ultrasound shows her exactly where the fluid pocket is deepest. Just below the xiphoid process. Below the left costal margin. She preps the skin with chlorhexidine, the sharp chemical smell mixing with the antiseptic that already coats every surface of this unit. Her hands move on their own now. Muscle memory isn't even the right term, it's something deeper. It's the kind of steady that only comes from having done hard things when the alternative was letting people die. The needle slides in. 6 centimeters. 7. The boy's small chest barely moves with each breath, his lungs fighting for room against a pericardium packed with fluid. Rachel's eyes stay locked on the ultrasound screen, watching the needle tip approach the dark pocket of accumulated blood and serum. Contact. The syringe fills immediately. Dark red fluid, weeks of bleeding into the wrong space, accumulating, pressing, squeezing. She pulls back. 20 milliliters. 30. 40. The pressure inside the pericardium drops with every draw. The boy's color begins to change back toward pink. His lips lose that terrible blue. The heart monitor's tone shifts. The compressed QRS complexes begin to expand. 45 milliliters. 50. The blood pressure rises. 90. 95. 102. The heart can finally beat the way it was designed to beat. No external pressure. No fluid stealing space. Just a child's brave little heart doing what hearts do, pumping, fighting, surviving. Rachel pulls the needle out with the same steady hand that inserted it. She covers the site with sterile gauze. The procedure takes 3 minutes and 20 seconds. At 2:50 that morning, Captain Chen's deaf son is alive because his heart is finally free. Sinus rhythm, the tech confirms, and the words hit the room like a benediction. But Rachel hears something else in those words. She hears Sterling's footsteps in the hallway. She hears the elevator at the far end of the unit arriving on the ICU floor. She hears the strategic machinery of a man who just watched his revenue stream nearly die and come roaring back to life under the hands of a nurse he's supposed to fire. Sterling appears in the doorway. His face is pale. Not the pale of relief that a patient survived. The pale of someone watching his carefully constructed fraud crumble in real time. Rachel has just performed an emergency procedure so clean, so perfect, that every attending in the hospital will hear about it by morning rounds. Every other pediatric ICU physician will know that a temp night shift nurse diagnosed and treated a life-threatening complication that the on-call resident couldn't even recognize. That's not an asset to a man like Sterling. That's a witness. That's a liability. That's a threat. Good work, Sterling says, and the words come out like he's speaking a foreign language. His jaw is locked. His eyes move from Rachel to the monitor to the boy and back again, calculating angles, assessing damage, running through scenarios. Rachel doesn't respond. She's already turning to the monitor, already taking vitals, already documenting the procedure in the chart with the precision of someone who's filled out combat casualty reports and field incident reviews. The documentation is flawless. Time of onset. Time of intervention. Fluid volume removed. Vital sign response. Every detail that will prove, beyond any doubt, what she did and why she did it. Get some rest, Sterling says finally, his voice steady now, controlled. We'll talk about this in the morning. Rachel meets his eyes for exactly 1 second. She doesn't blink. She doesn't look away first. When she does move, it's toward the supply cart to restock the equipment she used, methodical and unhurried, the same woman who's known her entire life how to clean up operational aftermath. Sterling walks back toward his office, and Rachel hears his phone already ringing before he reaches the doorway. The first call. The first move in the real game that's about to start. She doesn't need to hear his words to know what he's doing. Calling in favors. Activating networks. Treating her competence like a hostile act that requires immediate containment. She works through the rest of her shift with the boy stabilizing further, Captain Chen arriving just before dawn to find his son alive and breathing and fighting, alive in a way that seemed impossible 6 hours earlier. The captain's hands shake as he signs to his son, and the boy's eyes open, tracking movement, and Rachel watches them connect across the ICU the way only a father and son can. By 6 a.m., Sterling has made 3 phone calls to people with the kind of institutional power that doesn't fit on a business card. The board chairman. The temp agency credentialing director. And an outside investigator who builds termination cases for hospitals that need problems disappeared. Rachel packs her locker at the end of her shift, her hands folding the extra scrub she keeps for doubles, her badge on its lanyard catching the fluorescent light. The pair of worn combat boots sits on the locker shelf, the leather cracked and darkened with salt stains and dust from a compound in Kandahar that hasn't existed for 8 years. She doesn't know it yet, but those boots are about to become the most important object in her life. She has 36 hours left before Sterling's machinery fully engages. 36 hours before the investigation that will erase her from Sacred Heart and force her back into the shadows where she thought she'd stay for the rest of her life. The combat boots stay in the locker, waiting. Dr. Sterling sat in his office on the 7th floor at 4:44 p.m., his mahogany desk positioned to catch the last of the Raleigh sunlight. The phone felt heavy in his hand. He'd already made 2 calls, both successful, and now he was waiting for the third. His Rolex caught the light as he checked the time. 23 minutes since the pericardiocentesis. 23 minutes since that temporary nurse had proven she was operating at a level that terrified him more than any malpractice suit ever could. The first call had been to Chairman Hendricks of the hospital board. Sterling had information, trading information, the kind that could cost a man his retirement portfolio. Hendricks took the call on the second ring. "She's a liability," Sterling had said, his voice steady and controlled. "Drug diversion in the narcotic logs. I need her removed before it becomes a board-level incident." Hendricks didn't ask questions. Men like Hendricks didn't, not when other men held their financial secrets. The board chairman had simply said, "Handle it." The second call went to Morrison, the temp agency's quality assurance director. Sterling had invented the details with surgical precision. Inconsistent narcotic counts during her shifts. A resident who'd reported her insubordinate behavior toward attending physicians. Another physician who'd noticed medication discrepancies. None of it was true. All of it was credible. The temp agency couldn't risk their hospital contracts on an employee with a questionable background. Morrison promised to contact Rachel's references and flag her file as terminated pending investigation. Now Sterling made the third call. An outside investigator named Marks, the kind of consultant hospitals brought in when they needed a paper trail that led somewhere specific. "I need a termination case built within 3 hours," Sterling said quietly. "Drug diversion. Insubordination. Professional incompetence. Make it airtight enough that she can't fight it without a lawyer she can't afford." "Expensive," Mark said. "I don't care about the cost." By 4:52 p.m., the machinery was in motion. The hospital had turned itself into a weapon, and Sterling had aimed it directly at the one person who'd seen through his phantom consultations and his kickbacks. He leaned back in his chair, letting himself breathe. She was temporary staff. No union. No tenure. No institutional protection. She would be gone by evening. The intercom on his desk crackled. "Dr. Sterling, security is ready to escort the temporary nurse from the PQ." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The system would do what the system always did, protect itself. At 5:13 p.m., Rachel Torres stood in the pediatric ICU's locker room, her hands moving on their own, putting her few belongings into a cardboard box. A manila envelope sat on top, sealed and official. Termination letter. Effective immediately. Investigation pending. Banned from hospital grounds. The words had washed over her like rain she couldn't stop. 2 security officers waited outside. Their uniforms meant nothing to her. She'd faced down weapons fire in Kandahar province, had rappelled from Black Hawk helicopters into compounds where people tried to kill her for a living. But this was different. This was erasure. This was being sent back to the grave she was supposed to stay in. She reached into the locker and pulled out the pair of worn combat boots. Desert sand still clung to the treads, dark stains, blood or oil or both, marking the leather like battle scars. She'd carried them through fire once. Now she was carrying them out through linoleum hallways. The boots went into the box. The weight of them made everything else seem light. When she emerged from the locker room, the security officers flanked her with the kind of neutral efficiency that meant they didn't know who they were escorting out. Just a nurse. Just a temp. Just another termination. They walked through the PQ corridor, and that's when Captain Chen looked up from his son's bedside. The boy was stable now. The fluid that had been crushing his heart was gone. His vitals were holding. But he wasn't awake yet, and probably wouldn't be for days. Chen had kept vigil for 72 hours straight, and now he watched Rachel being walked out by security, his confusion visible like a physical thing. His son, 8 years old, deaf, still unconscious, had been signing questions before the sedation took hold. "What's happening?" his small hands had asked, over and over, until Chen had held them still and signed back, "She's helping. Just sleep." Now the child was asleep, and Rachel was disappearing, and Chen's mouth opened like he was about to ask something, but the security officers kept walking, and Rachel didn't look back. The cardinal rule of extraction operations: once you commit to the movement, you don't hesitate. You don't break rhythm. You move until you're clear. But the boy's question, "What's happening?" followed her down the corridor like a ghost. The escort moved through the lobby. Nurses at the station watched. Residents pretended not to notice. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects caught in invisible jars. Rachel's shoes, old and white and worn down at the heels, clicked against the tile floor with each step. The sound was too loud. Everything was too loud, or nothing was loud enough to fill the space where she used to exist. At 5:31 p.m., she stood in the parking lot with a cardboard box containing a pair of combat boots and nothing else. No letter of recommendation. No reference for future employment. No trail suggesting she'd ever done anything but fail. The security officers watched her walk to her car, a 2011 Honda Civic with one hubcap missing, and didn't leave until she drove away. That evening, rain hammered the cemetery in Raleigh's east sector. Rachel stood at a grave marked Marcus James Torres, beloved husband, 1984 to 2019, and felt the water soak through her scrubs, which she hadn't changed out of. Her hair hung wet against her neck. The cardboard box sat on the grass beside her, the combat boots visible inside, still gritty with sand from a place that had erased her. "I failed you," she said to the headstone. The rain was loud enough that she didn't have to whisper, but she did anyway. Failed that little boy. Failed the captain. Failed everyone who believed the senior chief could matter here. She knelt in the mud. Knee-high boots would have been practical, but the civilian knees in civilian rain didn't matter anymore. "I can't fight them, Marcus. I don't exist. I'm a ghost and ghosts don't win. There's no record of me. No proof. Operation Silent Thunder is classified so deep that even the Naval Inspector General doesn't have the clearance. If I surface, if I tell them who I was, I violate direct orders. And you know how this works. Violate orders and they make sure you disappear permanently." The rain kept falling. A distant siren wailed through the city, getting closer, then farther away. Rachel stayed on her knees in the mud until the light died completely, until the cemetery became a place of shadows, until she was nothing but a shape kneeling at a grave, mourning something that was already dead. 3 days later, at 3:11 a.m. on a rain-slicked road on the outskirts of Raleigh, a construction worker named Rashid fell asleep behind the wheel of his pickup truck. He'd worked a double shift at the new medical office complex on Hillsborough Street. He was tired. That was all. No one would know, as the truck crossed the center line and met a concrete barrier at 47 miles per hour, that in 7 hours he would recognize a face he thought he'd never see again. By dawn, Rashid was in the PICU at Sacred Heart, sedated and intubated, his head trauma requiring intensive monitoring. The nurses came and went. The machines beat their mechanical rhythms. And at 6:19 a.m., when the sedation began to wear off and his eyes flickered open, the first thing he saw was the hospital ceiling. The second thing he saw changed everything. Rashid's eyes fluttered open at 6:19 a.m. on day 10, and for 3 seconds he stared at the ceiling tiles of Sacred Heart's pediatric ICU, his consciousness reassembling itself like puzzle pieces. The ventilator hissed. The heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Then he turned his head, and he saw her. The woman stood at the opposite end of the room, reviewing Captain Chen's son's chart, her posture so still it seemed like she wasn't breathing. Rashid's entire body went rigid. His hand trembled. His eyes widened to the size of coins, and the monitor above him began to scream, heart rate climbing from 84 to 112 to 140 in 5 seconds flat. "Senior Chief," he gasped in accented English, the words barely more than a whisper, as if saying her name out loud would make her vanish like a ghost. The chart Rachel held dropped to the floor with a whisper of paper. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The room had gone silent except for Rashid's escalating panic and the frantic beeping of his cardiac monitor, and in that silence was recognition, not of the construction worker in the bed, but of herself, exposed at last after 2,847 days of burial. Captain Chen's head snapped up from the chair where he'd been keeping vigil beside his son's bed. He'd learned to sleep in 5-minute intervals, his body coiled like a spring that never quite decompressed. His eyes went from Rachel to the construction accident victim to his own child, deaf and still recovering consciousness in the bed between them, and confusion washed across his face like someone watching the final scene of a film without seeing the first 90 minutes. "What's happening?" Chen asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. Rachel turned. She moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had made life-and-death decisions in 120-degree heat while insurgents fired from 300 meters out. When she met Rashid's eyes, the timid temp nurse who'd been escorted from the building 1 week ago had already vanished, replaced by something harder, older, and infinitely more dangerous. "You remember me," she said. "Not a question." "Kandahar," Rashid whispered. "The compound." "You led," he couldn't finish. Tears were streaming down his face, and his left hand kept reaching for the call button before stopping mid-motion, as if his body had forgotten how to summon help from anyone. "You left me alive. When you could have," his voice broke. "I thought you died." Everyone said. The ICU doors burst open with enough force to rattle the glass panes. A man in dress blue strode through, and the Navy uniform alone would have commanded attention, but it was the bearing that made nurses and residents step back, the kind of walk that meant someone had spent 20 years knowing that his word was law. Commander James Price, 75th Ranger Regiment, decorated with 2 Navy Commendation Medals and a reputation for extracting soldiers from situations that had no exits. Price crossed the ICU in 4 strides and came to a stop beside Rachel. He was tall enough that his shadow fell across her like a veil. His eye swept the room, taking in Rashid's state, Captain Chen's confusion, Rachel standing motionless in scrubs with the chart at her feet, and something shifted in his expression from professional courtesy to something that looked like pride. "Rachel Torres," he said, his voice like a tank idling in a garage, low, controlled, apocalyptic. "Senior Chief Petty Officer. United States Navy." He placed a dress uniform on the edge of Captain Chen's son's bed, and the boy's eyes opened wider, the sedation finally releasing him into consciousness at precisely 6:23 a.m. The next 20 seconds unfolded in a sequence that broke Captain Chen's understanding of reality. A second man arrived, FBI Special Agent Watkins, his badge visible, his expression grave. Behind him came hospital CEO Patricia Goldstein, her face flushed with the specific color of someone who had spent the last 6 hours in emergency calls with federal agencies. "Captain Chen," Price said, and something in his voice made even the machine seem to pause, "your son is awake. And you deserve to know the truth about the woman who saved his life." Goldstein's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her jaw tightened. "The board members know," she said to Price. "Security's been notified. We have 45 minutes before the entire staff gets the summons." Price turned to Rachel. "You ready for this?" Rachel picked up the chart from the floor. She didn't answer the question directly. Instead, she looked at Rashid and said, "Your heart rate's 158. You need to breathe. 5 count in, 7 count hold, 5 count out. You know that." The construction worker's breathing began to slow. Somewhere in the chaos of his awakening and his impossible recognition, her voice cutting through the panic with the precision of someone who had kept men alive in the worst moments of their lives was enough. His monitor began to descend, 152, 147, 138. 10 years ago, Price began, and his words carried the weight of history that had been classified, redacted, and buried beneath layers of operational security. Senior Chief Torres led a direct action raid on a Taliban command compound in Helmand province. The objective was to extract intelligence assets and deny the enemy a forward operating base. What happened in that raid was so classified that the Pentagon sealed her records entirely. She was officially listed as killed in action. Agent Watkins stepped forward. His phone was in his hand. The mission was successful. The assets were protected. And the Navy made the decision that Senior Chief Torres needed to disappear to maintain operational security. She was given a new identity, a separation agreement, and a classified NDA that prohibited her from ever revealing her military service. Rachel stood motionless. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. But her eyes had become the color of a stormy Atlantic, and they were fixed on Captain Chen with an intensity that seemed to rewrite the past week in his mind. She worked here illegally, Watkins continued, because the temp agency's background check couldn't access her real file. She asked questions about your son's medical orders, Captain, because she recognized a pattern. She performs a life-saving procedure with the kind of precision that comes from training that no civilian nurse receives. And Dr. Sterling ordered her escorted from the building because he was running a fraud scheme that her questions threatened to expose. Price stepped closer to Rachel. His voice dropped another octave, the kind of tone that had launched 1,000 operations and called soldiers home from impossible situations. The raid that buried your record? 3 of the 4 intelligence assets you protected are still in the field. They're secure now. The Secretary of Defense signed off 2 hours ago. Your record is being unsealed. Rachel's jaw tightened. One breath. Then another. The tremor wasn't fear. It was restraint. I need you all in the main lobby, Goldstein said, looking at Price and Watkins. Captain Chen, if you're willing, we'd like you to be present as well. We have statements to make, and the staff needs to hear them directly. 90 minutes later, the lobby of Sacred Heart had become a cathedral of consequence. 217 people crowded the space, nurses, residents, attending physicians, housekeeping staff, orderlies, office workers. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical prayer. Phones were recording. Dr. Sterling stood near the back, his hand on his briefcase, calculating angles of escape. When he saw Commander Price in full dress uniform blocking the side entrance, his face went white. CEO Patricia Goldstein took the microphone. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had just spent 6 hours in calls with hospital lawyers and federal prosecutors. We have discovered a grave injustice, she began. Dr. Sterling, our PQ director, initiated fraudulent termination proceedings against Rachel Torres based on fabricated charges of drug diversion. These charges were untrue. They were designed to silence her because she asked questions about medication orders that violated protocol. The crowd stirred. Phones tilted upward, recording. We also discovered that Dr. Sterling has been billing consultations that were never performed, 47 fake consultations totaling $847,000 over 3 years. These billings were part of a kickback arrangement with MedSupply Solutions, which required keeping pediatric patients on ventilators beyond the point of medical necessity to generate rental fees. Sterling's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Captain Chen took the microphone, and his voice broke the air like a hammer through glass. That woman saved my son's life when 10 of your doctors told me there was nothing more they could do. She performed an emergency pericardiocentesis in the middle of the night. Your on-call resident was frozen. She drained the fluid compressing his heart, and she brought him back when everyone else had already written him off. The crowd murmured. Phones captured every word. Commander Price stepped forward. The dress blues caught the light. The cluster of ribbons on his chest caught the light. The military bearing caught the light, and suddenly everyone in the lobby understood that something vast and classified had just been declassified in front of 200 witnesses. Senior Chief Petty Officer Rachel Torres served in the United States Navy for 12 years, Price said. His voice was that tank-idling sound again, and it filled every corner of the lobby. She completed 3 combat tours. She earned the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. Silence. 2 Bronze Stars with Valor. Silence deeper. 2 Purple Hearts. The silence was so thick you could have operated in it. And a Navy Cross. Someone gasped. Someone else dropped their phone. Price continued, each word deliberate, each medal its own sentence. This woman was ordered to disappear after a classified operation to protect intelligence sources. She gave up her identity, her military career, her benefits, everything she'd earned, to serve her country one last time. And when she tried to serve again as a civilian nurse, trying to help a child who had nothing but time and pain ahead of him, you destroyed her for asking questions about why a patient was receiving unnecessary medications. Agent Watkins moved forward. He held up a warrant. We have discovered that Dr. Sterling's fraud scheme would have continued undetected if Rachel Torres hadn't asked questions. We're seizing financial records, initiating a criminal investigation, and this goes to the U.S. Attorney's Office. CEO Goldstein's voice came through the microphone again, final and absolute. Dr. Sterling, you are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Sterling's face transformed from white to crimson to something that wasn't a human color anymore. I didn't, you can't, his voice cracked like a boy's. I have 17 years with this hospital. I have connections. I have? You have nothing, Price said quietly. Your medical license is suspended pending investigation. The state board will be receiving a full report. And you're going to need a very good lawyer. Security moved toward him. Sterling backed up, and then he was walking toward the exit, his Rolex catching the light one last time, his briefcase looking like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Somewhere in the back, a nurse started clapping. Then another. Then another. The sound built like thunder, like artillery, like the sound of something broken being swept away. But they weren't clapping for Sterling's destruction. They were clapping for Rachel, who stood in her restored senior chief uniform that Commander Price had brought, her dress blues fitted perfectly, her medals arranged in ascending order from left to right, her shoulders back, her head level, her eyes forward. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She looked exactly like what she was, a soldier who had survived the unsurvivable and brought a child back from the edge of forever. 3 weeks later, Dr. Sterling taught CPR fundamentals at Raleigh Community College for $17 an hour. His hands trembled when he demonstrated chest compressions. His license remained suspended. His luxury condo was listed with a real estate agent who specialized in distressed properties. His calls to the board members went unanswered. At Sacred Heart, Rachel stood beside Captain Chen's son in his hospital room. The boy was awake now, his eyes bright, his recovery advancing at the pace of miracles. He'd been deaf his entire life, and silence was his native language, but in the past 3 weeks, his fingers had learned new words, new shapes, new meanings. The pair of worn combat boots sat on the nightstand beside his bed, cracked leather and dark stains, boots that had walked through fire and carried a woman home when everything said she couldn't make it. "Are those your boots?" the boy signed, his fingers moving with the fluid precision of someone speaking fluently in a language that transcended sound. Rachel signed back, "Yes." They walked through fire when everyone said it was impossible. The boy reached over and touched the leather with reverence, traced the stains with his small fingers, and signed, "Like you did for me." Captain Chen embraced Rachel while she was still signing, and tears streamed down both their faces. This was the moment after the battle, when the adrenaline faded and what you'd actually survived became real enough to break you apart. Commander Price watched from the doorway. He was still in uniform. He'd be in uniform until he retired, and something in the way he carried himself suggested he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Later that day, the hospital held a ceremony reinstating Rachel Torres as a full-time staff nurse with back pay, benefits, and a position that no administrator would ever question again. The construction worker, Rashid, the Taliban fighter who'd been granted asylum, who'd survived the raid and found the courage to build a new life, approached Rachel in the corridor outside the PQ. Recognition had finally clicked when he saw her in uniform, saw her standing beside Captain Chen, saw her signing to the boy without shame or hesitation. He saluted. His hand shook. Tears streamed down his face. Rachel returned the salute, then pulled him into an embrace. "You didn't die," he whispered. "Neither did you," she answered. That evening, Rachel visited her husband's grave again. There was no rain this time. No tears. She placed her hand on the stone and whispered, "I didn't fail, Marcus. Took a while, but I didn't fail." The words carried on the wind like a promise finally kept. As she walked away, Captain Chen's son waved from his father's car in the parking lot, his hand signing "Thank you, thank you, thank you" again and again. Rachel signed back, then paused at her own car and looked up at Sacred Heart's lit windows, at the place where she'd found purpose again, where a classified past and a civilian present had collided and emerged on the other side. If you believe that heroes deserve recognition when they step out of the shadows, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Like this video and comment with your take. Did Rachel deserve the career that was buried, or does giving that up for intelligence operations justify what happened? Let me know in the comments below.